Hey everyone, Noir here. Let's get into today's Reddit story.
My name is Claire, and I am 31 years old. Not too long ago, I bought an old 3-bedroom house sitting on the edge of town. The place was in rough shape, which was exactly why I got it for a price that most people couldn't believe. Rain leaked through the roof whenever the weather turned bad. The kitchen cabinets were hanging by loose hinges and looked ready to fall apart. Out back, the yard had been completely neglected, packed with waist-high weeds, and there was an old rust-covered shed that looked like one strong gust of wind would knock it flat. Everyone in my family thought I had completely lost my mind. My sister, Brooke, had gone in the exact opposite direction. Around the same time, she bought a 5-bedroom mansion inside the most expensive gated neighborhood in the city. Her place came with a swimming pool, a private home theater, and a 3-car garage where her husband, Travis, proudly kept his collection of luxury vehicles. Before long, comparing our houses became everyone's favorite conversation whenever the family got together, and my parents never missed an opportunity to remind me which purchase they believed was the better one. About 3 weeks after I finalized the paperwork on my fixer-upper, we were all having our usual Sunday dinner when my mother decided to bring it up once again. We were gathered around the dining table while she flipped through pictures of Brooke's new house on her phone, proudly showing each one to my aunt as though she were giving a guided tour through some famous museum. The moment she reached a photo of Brooke's polished marble kitchen countertops, she glanced over at me and laughed. "You'll never have a house like your sister's," she said with a confident smile, shaking her head as if she were simply pointing out an undeniable truth. My father didn't even bother lifting his eyes from his dinner plate. "She's right, Claire. Some people just set bigger goals than others." I could feel the heat rising in my face, but I kept my mouth shut. Years earlier, I had figured out there was no point arguing with my parents whenever the conversation involved Brooke. Those discussions always ended exactly the same way. Naturally, Brooke couldn't resist adding her own comment. She leaned back comfortably in her chair, slowly swirling the wine in her glass, before flashing that familiar smug smile she'd been giving me ever since we were little girls. It was the same expression that always managed to make me feel about 2 feet tall. "You're jealous, aren't you?" she asked loudly enough that everyone sitting at the table could hear. Several relatives laughed under their breath. I forced myself to smile, changed the subject, and pretended it didn't bother me. But later that night, while I drove back to my crooked little house with its squeaky front porch, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The funny thing was, I wasn't jealous at all. I had chosen that property for a reason. Before I ever made an offer, I spent months studying everything connected to it. I researched the neighborhood, checked the soil reports, reviewed the property boundaries, and dug through years of permit records. I wanted to understand exactly what I was buying before I signed a single document. Unlike my sister, I never purchase something just because it looks impressive. I make decisions after I know exactly what I'm getting myself into. The part my family didn't know was that I work in county code enforcement. Every day I deal with zoning issues, building permits, property disputes, and construction violations. It is what I do for a living, and I have become very good at spotting problems that other people completely overlook. Months before Brooke and Travis found their dream home, I had already noticed something unusual about that entire development while reviewing work-related records. The neighborhood had been built on land that had originally been classified as protected wetland before being reclassified. On top of that, the builder had managed to rush construction through inspections by taking advantage of a permit loophole that was still being investigated by the state. I never warned Brooke, partly because it was not my place to interfere. If I am being completely honest, there was also a small, childish part of me that wanted to see how everything would eventually turn out. About a week after that uncomfortable family dinner, I invited Brooke over for tea. I told her I wanted to show her how much progress I had made on the house. I had installed brand new flooring with my own hands and was rebuilding the kitchen one cabinet at a time. She accepted the invitation, although her voice made it obvious she was coming for another reason. She wanted to see my little fixer-upper for herself, so she would have even more jokes to tell at the next family gathering. She arrived exactly when she said she would. She looked like she was on her way to an exclusive country club instead of visiting a construction site. Her high heels clicked across my gravel driveway as if she couldn't believe anyone actually lived somewhere like this. The second she stepped inside my front door, before she had even removed her sunglasses, her purse started vibrating from an incoming call. She sighed with obvious annoyance, pulled out her phone, and answered it while standing in the middle of my unfinished living room. As I watched her, I saw every bit of confidence disappear from her face. The smug smile vanished as quickly as water draining through a broken pipe. Her eyes became wide with panic. She slapped a hand over her mouth. Then she suddenly screamed into the phone so loudly that her voice echoed off the exposed drywall throughout the room. "You need to get here right now." I stood frozen in my kitchen, still holding the teapot. And somehow I already knew that whatever was happening on the other end of that call was about to completely change everything my parents believed about which one of us had actually made the smarter investment. Brooke's hands were trembling so hard that she almost dropped her phone. When the call finally ended, she slowly turned toward me. Her face had gone completely pale beneath her makeup. She barely managed to get the words out. The county had just issued an emergency evacuation order for her entire neighborhood. The call had come from her neighbor, Evelyn. According to her, county inspectors and structural engineers had flooded the development. They were putting up caution tape around several homes, including Brooke's own house. I slowly set the teapot on the counter, my heart beating faster because I immediately understood what was happening. The wetland issue I had identified months earlier had finally come back to haunt the builder. It was no longer just about a fine or a warning. The situation had grown into a full structural safety investigation. Brooke didn't even bother saying goodbye. She rushed out of my house, her heels sinking into the gravel as she ran to her car. A second later, she was speeding away toward her neighborhood without looking back once. About 20 minutes later, I got into my own car. Part of me was worried about my sister, but as someone who worked for the county, I also felt obligated to see the situation for myself. When I arrived, the neighborhood was in complete chaos. Fire trucks and county vehicles filled the streets. Homeowners stood outside in bathrobes and slippers, holding pets, family photo albums, and whatever valuables they had managed to grab before leaving. They stared at their expensive homes as if they expected them to collapse at any moment. Brooke was standing in her driveway, crying. Travis was arguing with a man wearing a hard hat. I recognized him immediately as Marcus Holloway, one of the lead inspectors from my department. Grant explained, loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, that recent soil tests had confirmed what state geologists had suspected for months. The developer had drained and filled protected wetlands without obtaining the required permits. To move the project along faster, falsified environmental reports had been submitted. As a result, the ground beneath at least 12 homes, including Brooke's, was unstable and continuing to shift. Several foundations already had hairline cracks, and engineers believed those cracks would only become worse over time. The homes had not simply lost value. According to the county's official assessment, they were considered uninhabitable until further review. Brooke's 5-bedroom mansion, the same house my mother had proudly talked about for weeks, the same house that had been compared to mine every Sunday, was now sitting on land the state considered unsafe. My parents arrived a short time later after Brooke called them in a panic. I watched my mother's face as she looked around at the caution tape, the cracked driveway pavers, and the neighbors standing outside in tears. For the first time I could remember, she had nothing to say. My father kept asking Grant the same questions again and again, almost hoping the answers would somehow change. Grant calmly explained that the homeowners would most likely face years of legal action against the builder. They would need temporary housing, and property values could take years to recover, if they ever recovered at all. Meanwhile, engineers were already discussing which houses might eventually have to be condemned. That evening, my parents came to my house. It was the same fixer-upper they had laughed at only a few weeks earlier. Since Brooke's home had been declared unsafe, they had nowhere else nearby to gather. I made them tea in the kitchen I had been slowly renovating, the same kitchen Brooke had looked down on, and quietly explained everything I had known for months. I told them how I had carefully reviewed the permit history before buying my house. I explained that I had intentionally chosen property with stable soil, a clean environmental record, and a well-documented history because I understood the risks of cutting corners. My mother sat quietly, staring into her tea. Finally, my father admitted that he had underestimated both my work and the importance of what I actually did for a living. He said he finally understood the value of building on a solid foundation instead of focusing only on appearances. Over the following weeks, Brooke and Travis moved into a rental home while their lawsuit against the builder worked its way through the courts. Experts warned that the case could take years and might never fully recover everything they had lost. Meanwhile, my little fixer-upper kept improving one weekend at a time. I finished installing the kitchen cabinets myself, restored the hardwood floors, and repaired the leaking roof my mother had once laughed about. From then on, I hosted every family dinner. Whenever my parents came over, I noticed them looking around the house I had rebuilt with my own hands, sitting safely on solid ground in a neighborhood I had carefully researched before buying. At last, they understood. Owning a home has never been about square footage, marble countertops, or how impressive it looks from the street. It is about the ground beneath it, and whether that foundation will still be there when everything else begins to shake. If this story meant something to you, and you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you the most, be sure to subscribe. I share stories like this every week, real, emotional, and filled with the kind of justice we all hope to see. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next story.